It's a little past 6, so we'll get started. Welcome to the Tennessee Valley Wild Ones monthly public program. My name is Lynn Rutherford, and I will be hosting tonight with Sally Winsell at the control panel. So we will start with a few words about Zoom, just to get us all on the same page. And then we will have some announcements, a little business about Wild Ones, and we'll hear from our speakers tonight, Lucy Ellis and Pete Stewart, talking about the Understory Gardens. And at the end, we will have time for questions. And by the way, as Sally just mentioned, this is being recorded, just for your information. So about Zoom, you've all been muted at this point, and we would appreciate it if you stay muted for the duration of the presentation, just because background noise builds up and it can get really distracting and hard to hear our speakers, even if it seems like you're being quiet. So we'll just stay muted. If you do have questions as the presentation is going on, please feel free to type them. Go ahead and write them out in the chat box. So if you take your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, you've got your mute option on the left, very important to stay muted. And then if you should need to stop your video, you want to duck out for a minute, or pick your nose, something great like that, you can stop your own video, give yourself some privacy. And then the chat box, you can go ahead and click that, and that will pop up a panel on the right side of your screen probably. And that would be a great place to write your questions for Lucy and Pete. And we will go over those questions at the end.
Okay.
So please, please stay muted, folks. The mute button is on the very bottom far left. Okay. So yeah, later, I'll just say that later when Lucy is speaking, it may help to have your view in speaker view so that her screen can fill the screen. Great. So do we have any announcements tonight? Anything from Wild Ones to talk about before we begin our presentation? If you have an announcement, I guess you could raise your hand, or otherwise feel free to get Sally's attention. I will go ahead and say one announcement is that our next public monthly meeting will be on August 10th, and we will be hearing from David Johnson with the Trust for Public Land. So that is a continuation of our community conservation conversations. We've been hearing from a lot of different groups that do conservation work around Chattanooga. So now we're going to hear from the Trust for Public Land next month, a month from today. Any other announcements about CNP or anything like that? Okay, we got July 27th is the Beginning Gardeners Roundtable, and that will be at 6 p.m. So any of these announcements you can find on our website and in the latest newsletter. So if you have questions about that, you're not sure where to find more information, we can also address that in the chat box. So July 27th is another program, and August 10th. Any other announcements? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Great, okay. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you all tonight to two very special co-workers of mine from the City of Chattanooga. I am very lucky to get to work with both of them as colleagues. We can bounce ideas off each other and learn from. So we as a city are really lucky to have them also. Really great folks, hardworking, bringing a lot of great experience to the table. They both started relatively recently, and since they came on board, I have just felt so much more excited about working at the city, and this kind of getting more ecologically conscientious design and maintenance worked into the greater land management scheme in Chattanooga is really exciting. So Lucy has extensive experience as a field botanist, Lucy Ellis, working for national parks and the Bureau of Land Management, various places all over the country. We work really closely together in the water quality program for the City of Chattanooga, managing stormwater pollution with pretty much exclusively native green infrastructure plantings. She also works really hard to get biodiversity worked into new city land development plans and kind of uphold standards for planting. Let's see. She has spoken to wild ones a couple times now, but you probably have not gotten to meet Pete Stewart before because he is just a little newer at the city, taking over for Gene Hyde as the city forester. So he is our city forester. He also works really hard to uphold standards, doing lots and lots of plans review to make sure that they are in compliance with the tree ordinance, and again, fighting for biodiversity, making sure that things are planted well. He also manages 2 to 3 crews that keep our city safe and running, responding to emergencies 24/7. So 311 requests, hazardous tree removal. So yeah, two great folks. Occasionally we have time to brainstorm and consult with each other and coordinate efforts, which brings me to this project that they're going to talk about tonight. This is a project that Lucy spearheaded, and it is really just one example of how water quality and forestry and parks divisions are all working together to manage your public lands in a sustainable way. So yes, join me in welcoming quietly from your own screen, Pete Stewart will start us off.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Volume's okay? And thanks, Sally and Wild Ones, for the invitation. This is a project I came in after it started, so there might be some details that Lucy or Lynn might correct me on afterwards. But I started the city last summer, and then it was this past winter, beginning of February, when I officially started in this position, the city forester position. I was really grateful to work with Gene, and currently am. Gene's helping on a part-time basis with planning for next year's plantings. I feel really lucky to have worked with him and still am learning lots from him. So this project, so is the slideshow up that's visible? Okay. Understory Gardens is the name we came up with for this project, and I'm going to go into the background of where the project came from. So it grew out of the Land Managers Working Group, which reaches across all city divisions. In this case, it's parks, forestry, and water quality are all inside of Public Works, but the Land Managers Working Group, the idea is to coordinate land management across any division. And so this would also include youth and family development, has a lot of land that needs to be managed. And really almost any, for instance, the city's wellness center on 11th Street is managed by human resources. So there are lands all across the city that are managed by different departments. And the goal of this working group is to coordinate those activities and promote green infrastructure and biodiversity. So this project specifically involved parks, forestry, my department, and water quality. I'll go back to some of the tree data that's been collected. These were contracts. These are projects that Gene wrote grants for, and he was able to get outside companies to do analysis of tree data, satellite data in Chattanooga. So this image is from 2008. I think it's the National Agricultural Imagery Program. So satellite data, and American Forests did the analysis of urban tree cover. So the different colors on the map just show different types of land cover. From bare ground, which in the middle you can see some, that might be Vulcan in the middle of the map, impervious, open space in yellow, and trees are green. So Chattanooga's overall tree cover was 51%, which would be high compared to other urban areas. But a lot of this you can see is made up of the slopes of Lookout Mountain, Elder Mountain, and the Volkswagen Nature Park on the eastern end. So it's not an easy, it's not a clear-cut comparison between cities when you're talking about tree cover. 51% would definitely be high compared to dense urban areas. In the downtown, the tree cover was 13%, which is fairly low. In the goal of the Take Root campaign, which was a tree planting campaign, part that was coordinated through the city with private funding. One of their goals, their main goal, was to raise downtown tree cover to 15%. I don't know what that number is now. We haven't done this analysis since 2008. I would love to find funding to do that again. A separate project that Gene organized was this iTree analysis, and you might be familiar with iTree. It's free software from the Forest Service, and it helps you set up a statistical sample of urban forest trees and then to analyze the composition. And so this was also from 2008, and we don't have newer data, unfortunately, but I would love to do that again. This is still useful data. And Davy was the company that did the work. They broke down the city's publicly owned trees into city managed and non-managed trees. I think the total was about 200,000. 166,000 were city managed in their breakdown, which they didn't define very clearly. There were 102 species, and the ones in the chart here are the 5 most common, which makes me question how they define city managed, because none of these trees, except for crepe myrtle, none of these would be planted trees. So they're clearly capturing a lot of just natural regeneration here. But let's see, of these species, hackberry, dogwood, cherry are all native species. Mimosa, an invasive, and crepe myrtle, non-native. I'm actually interested in planting hackberry. There are improved cultivars, but to the best of my knowledge, they've never been planted here as in tree pits or the verge of the road. Dogwood isn't known to survive on street side plantings. And cherry, I'm interested. I don't know if there are improved varieties of black cherry. But these are the 5 most common trees on public lands inside of city limits. How are we doing questions? Are there any questions at this point?
People are typing them in the chat box, and we'll get to them all at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is also from the same study, looking at species diversity. So there's this rule of thumb. It's kind of made up out of nowhere. It came from a paper in the late 90s. It's just a rule of thumb. It's no scientific standard, but this was a urban forester writing about species diversity, where within a city, you wouldn't want to see any one species make up more than 10% of the population, no genus more than 20%, and no family 30%. And that is it's a pretty easy bar to meet. Some people would cut those numbers in half, but citywide, we met those those rules. Almost. Hackberry was slightly over 10%. And again, when you look citywide, you're looking at naturally regenerated trees. It's a huge part of the city's city-owned tree population. So that would include, in most places, 10 to 15 feet off from the edge of pavement. In most places, there's 10 to 15 feet of city right away where these trees are. Some places more, some places less. But in the downtown, you can see there's a real lack of diversity. These 5 species here made up 80% of all species. And this is within the central business district. Crepe myrtle made up almost a third of all trees. Willow oak, 17%. Lacebark elm, ginkgo, and golden rain tree. Of those, willow oak is the only native. And let's see. Yeah, it makes up a huge chunk of the downtown trees. This map, there are different definitions of the central business district. We have a crew that maintains downtown. It's a larger district than that. There's a separate one for the business improvement district. There's multiple ones the city uses. So this is an arbitrary boundary I drew on the map here. But within that area, there were about 3,400 trees, and almost a quarter of those were willow oaks. And if you remember, back in Broad Street was lined with Bradford pears until late 90s, early 2000s is when they started to be replaced, and a lot of them were willow oaks. And especially the ones in the Broad Street median between MLK and 4th, those are definitely the top dollar trees. You can tell how healthy they are and how their form is symmetrical and upright. Those are all the Ascendor cultivars from Select Trees, which is a Athens nursery that grows high-end bald burlap trees. But you can see all throughout downtown, the willow oak is very common. Overcup oak was something Gene started planting in the last 5 or 10 years. It's pretty common, and there are a few water oaks. So I would guess oaks make up close to a third of the downtown trees. In 2018, you might remember hearing about this. There was the scale outbreak on the downtown oaks. In that photo, this from the clipping, that's an overcup oak. And I was out of town. I was in Virginia at the time, but I heard about this because the company I used to work for ended up being the contractor for treatment of the trees. And I got a couple calls about pricing. So I was involved in this from a distance. So the most likely, I haven't ID'd these. I don't know if they were actually sent to a lab, but the most likely pest was the oak lecanium scale. There are some other lookalikes. And they just covered the twigs. I don't know if y'all ever saw these up close. You can still see, you'll find these scale insects on downtown willow oaks. Most of them are dead. If they're dry and crumble in your fingers, they're dead, but there are still some live ones. And they just coated the twigs. And different life stages feed on sap from the leaves and the twigs. And the end result is they just sap the tree's vitality. It would not be a quick death, but they could lead to tree mortality over a few years of when there's a large population. So Gene took it really seriously. As you can see, these are the downtown's most prominent trees. The most common trees were threatened across the board. And they did look at other options, but decided to treat them. Oh yeah, that's up close. That's a look at. I think that's lecanium scale. The ones I've seen are darker brown color, but that's the size, and that's how you'd find them clustering on twigs. Um, and so yeah, they're difficult to treat. They're an armored scale. Um, they have they have a complex life cycle, but they have a crawler stage where they're feeding on the leaves, and then the eggs, I believe, develop inside of the female shell. So they're protected when they're inside of that shell, and then the adults are protected inside that shell. So they're difficult to treat conventionally, although you could do it if you timed it right when the crawlers are out. But foliar application, whether you're using pyrethrins or some natural treatment or something like hort oil, it's just not feasible on large trees. There's a lot of downsides to spraying mature trees in a dense area. So it's used to be done more commonly, much less so now. So treatment would usually be systemic, where you would apply insecticide to the trunk or soil, and the tree takes it up through the vascular system, and it stays in there, in some cases for years. So systemic insecticide can kill insects that feed on the tree for years to come, depending on which ones. And most of them that we use in arboriculture are neonicotinoids, which you're probably familiar with. So the one that got used here was dinotefuran, or Transtex, the brand name. About $18,000 spent to treat 562 trees, and it worked. It did the job. By the next year, there were almost no live. It was hard to find a live insect on the trees, and for the most part, the trees are doing well. There are still plenty on Riverfront Parkway that are chlorotic or have yellowed leaves, which is probably more related to soil than pests. But as alternatives to chemical treatment, one of the problems, which I'm sure you're aware of chemical treatment, is that they can increase the problem. By killing off all the natural enemies, it can just lead to a later spike in scale. And we haven't seen that yet. But I haven't done a lot of surveying, but that is a definite possibility, especially if we were to continue to treat with a systemic insecticide. In that article I showed, Gene mentioned that his long-term goal was to move towards biocontrol, or biocontrol just meaning using natural enemies to control pests. That was his goal long-term. And then he was contacted last year by this company called New Urban Forestry, which is a tree service with at least one entomologist on staff. They have quite a few specialists. They contacted Gene with a proposal for release of natural enemies of scale. And these are the ones that they proposed to release. I'm not, other than the green lacewing, that one is used pretty commonly. I wasn't familiar with these insects. And myself, Lucy, and a few others met with the company and Gene last fall, I think, where they made the proposal. And in our opinion, there wasn't enough research behind what they were proposing to do. They had never done anything on this scale. And it was a good opportunity potentially, but there was a lot of unknowns. I don't think any of these insects are native, at least they're not native to the Southeast. And I don't think any of them can even overwinter here. So aside from invasive questions, there's no way to have a sustainable population. I could be wrong, but I think that's true of most of them, if not all. So that was our concern, is we want to create a sustainable integrated pest management solution. So that's where Understory Gardens came from. Instead of starting with the release of insects, we wanted to start with habitat, where natural enemies of scale and other pests can go through their entire life cycle and be able to feed and reproduce. So the idea is that we'd have multiple gardens for pollinators and for beneficial insects within range of downtown oak trees, oak populations. And the first location we started with was at Main Terrain, which is on the map here. And you can see it's within a few hundred feet of the oaks are in the light blue. We've got willow oaks on Broad here and more over on Carter. So that was the first planting. You'll see Lucy talk more about. And I think that's all I've got.
Hey, Pete, if you just stay screen shared, I'll follow your screen and just tell you to hit next slide.
Okay.
Thanks. So what Pete was touching on there, we decided to give ourselves the chance to create our own integrated pest management strategy because can everyone hear me okay? Nods. Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So we wanted to give ourselves the opportunity to start this strategy for ourselves. And so integrated pest management is strategy of multiple methods that uses the life history of a pest to reduce the damage and issues that come from that pest. It sometimes is similar to certified organic methods, but it is slightly different in that sometimes part of IPM or integrated pest management, you would actually use some chemicals and it's not a certified process. So integrated pest management promotes human and environmental health, which are one and the same. And sometimes the cost and time invested is greater than traditional methods, but overall cost is reduced over time because you've built a system that sustains itself and just needs tweaking over time. And so the initial cost and time is put into building that system. And so that's the point where we are right now. We're just in the pilot phase of the project. Next slide. So the largest component in integrated pest management is actually the monitoring involved in checking to see if your methods are working. And if they're not, how can you tweak them or add to it or take away to get your optimal approach working. So with the help of UTC graduate students and Dr. Beasley at UTC, we hope that they can help us by providing baseline insect diversity downtown so we know what species we have. Because right now we have gardens and we know that we have some beneficial insects, but we don't know which ones. So this will help us determine what we need to do moving forward, if we need to change our strategy or, better target our gardens to be in proximity to the affected willow oaks. Or maybe there's another tree species with another tree pest that is far more devastating. PM.org. They're a fantastic group of literature out of North Carolina State University. And they work a lot with downtown urban environmental health issues, especially arising from non-native plants, and also looking at the native insects that help take care of those pest insects on urban trees. Very fascinating research out of NC State. Next slide. So the understory was a collaboration, like Pete was saying, and we ended up sharing our time and labor and money and pooling our resources to make this project happen fairly quickly. We didn't have a lot of contract writing or even really a lot of money going around. It was fairly cheap. It was about $7,000, and we still have some plants left over and materials ready for the next project. I have to say that Parks gave us a lot of time and their equipment and people to help with this. There we are, we're sheet mulching and then spreading mulch over that newspaper, weeds from poking through. And they were integral in getting that mulch to us. And forestry was great. They bought us plants and fence supplies and gave us the overall kind of site instructions. Like, we based our site selection off of proximity to trees. And so we used a lot of the data that you saw before to help us with that decision. And here at Water Quality, we did a lot of the planning, and we bought a lot of the plants too and helped execute this. But it was all a group effort, thanks to our collaboration in the land management working group. Next slide. So this is the species list that we came to have for the gardens. You can see there's multiple species within genuses, like there's 3 echinaceas, there's 2 spiderworts or tradescantias, and that is really to capture the real world diversity of Tennessee. We have multiple species per genre in many cases, and that kind of smaller scale diversity is really important, especially for the kind of the understory layer of a forest or the ground cover, because the insects are building those relationships with the plants, and then they're able to get stronger and have more babies and do more ecological services that the environment needs to be healthy. So I'm going to try to share my screen now, or just turn on. Let's see. All right. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So here at Main Terrain, let's check out what is blooming. So this is the Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. That's the narrowleaf mountain mint. And I know a lot of wild ones are familiar with this one. I've seen it in your yards. It's a really great native mint, and it can grow in really tough situations. It doesn't mind the heat, and it can also tolerate some shade. So that's one that I wanted to have, because the way that the flowers are shaped, they're very open, and that means that the target for these gardens, the beneficial insects, especially wasps, can get their little faces in there and drink the nectar. And that's really important, because if the flower tubes are too big or they're too long, the insects will not get nectar from those flowers. Just like, there's a certain point that you can reach going up to your kitchen cabinets before you need someone else's help or a stepladder. The insects have their limits as well. So you can kind of think of these flat open flowers as being perfect for little wasps. This is orange coneflower. And I see a question. This is at Main Terrain, the garden where I am right now. And orange coneflower is really great. It spreads really easily. So if you have this in your garden at home, you might need to watch it, but it also transplants really easily. So that's good. So you'll get your money's worth out of this one. Again, things in the aster family, sunflowers, daisies, those have little tiny open flowers that are native pollinators and beneficial insects. Here we've got Echinacea purpurea, and this is the regular purple coneflower. There were three kinds of coneflower on the list, and this one is the most common, and it also has the shortest petals. And some of the things that the insects like about the asters are the tiny flowers, and there's actually so very many of them. There's probably about, maybe 150 flowers right here, all in the center and on the edges too. So each one of these is a single flower, all spinning around this center disc part where there's like 100 flowers. So I got a question about the insect families that we're trying to target. Those are wasps in the Braconid family. So Braconidae, and then also Ichneumonidae. And those are both mostly parasitic genres. So you can think of each of those family, Braconidae and Ichneumonidae, have several genuses associated with them, and then several species within those genus. So the potential to attract lots and lots of different parasitic wasps is great. And we reflect that with the diversity of the flowers we put here. Right here, this is beard tongue or penstemon. It already bloomed, but it looks like it's going to make a lot of seed heads, so that's exciting. We want all of these plants to spread out as much as possible. Ooh, let's see. So over here, this one's really neat. This one is in the carrot family, so it has a lot of little tiny flowers clustered together. There's a fly on this one. This is rattlesnake master, and so this one is actually in full bloom right now. I'll get it in the shade so you can see. So little teeny tiny flowers all in the ball, and that's great as a nectar source for our target insects, the parasitic wasps. This one's really nice. It spreads very easily and has really great qualities like these awesome leaves. Just love them. And we've got another carrot family that was an early bloomer. Another thing that we did is try to get blooms all year, all season long, spanning the families. So this is Golden Alexander's. So that's making seeds. So that had a lovely yellow flower back in May. So about the time that we planted this was planted about the end of April. This was still blooming, and a lot of these were still really short plants. You can see the spiderwort is starting to look a little hot, but a lot of times those will perk back up in the fall. And that's another quality of plants that is important to note. Is it going to bloom opportunistically? Is it going to bloom if it gets enough water and enough sunlight? Let's see what else we got. Here we go. So this one's a little bit early. This is New England aster. Again, lots of little tiny flowers in there for smaller insects. This one usually doesn't start blooming until a bit later. I've got a question if the wasps are going to sting people, and the answer is no. these wasps can't sting people. Their stingers are not for defense, like a yellow jacket or a bumblebee. They've evolved to have stingers that actually lay eggs. And so when you're thinking of getting stung by a bee, those are social insects. And so they have a different life strategy where they have a colony and there's only one mom, right? The queen. And so she's laying a bunch of eggs and they have the job of defending the queen who's busy laying eggs. The parasitic wasps I'm talking about are solitary. They don't live in groups. And their strategy is to lay an egg inside of like a really soft-bodied caterpillar or one of these scale insects. And then the babies hatch out of another insect's offspring. So it's really brutal. It's really crazy, but it's a strategy that's worked for them for a long, long time. And we are just trying to get a handle on that amazing tool. Because, right, we're using biodiversity like a tool, and each species of plant works a little differently. Each insect works a little differently. And the more different kinds of work that's being done, the stronger an ecosystem is. So I hope that answers your question about the sting. They can't sting people, but they hopefully will sting all the scale insect. So we're going to try to put them to work for us. So this is we put 2 gardens here. So let me walk over to the other garden. See if there's anything else blooming over there. This one looks really nice. So yeah, about the same ones that are blooming. The echinacea, purpurea, really nice. And that pycnanthemum in the back. That big one in the corner, that will probably bloom next month. This is blue mist flower. We got those in gallon pots, so they went in the ground really big. So it's responding well. That's good. But yeah, that's what's going on in the garden. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, the grasses. Let's see. Ooh, yeah, we've got one blooming. So here, I don't know if you can see, that's eyebrow grass. It's also called blue grama. And it's a really awesome grass. It's more native to drier climates, but it does tolerate the humidity here. And it doesn't get any taller than this. So that's actually a really tall one, I think. And we've got ponytail grass or Mexican feather grass. This was a substitute because we couldn't get prairie drop seed. They were out of that. But this one's this one's native closer to like Arizona and Mexico, but it's really good to have in the hot summers that we have, especially like right next to the pavement. So we've got all this heat coming off the pavement, and this doesn't mind. I saw a question pop up. Yes, this has irrigation. I think we run it 3 times a week, and we can dial that back if it rains a lot. I know we had to back in June when it was so rainy. And then we got, here we go. Let's see. There it is. And then we've got our third grass is little blue stem. And this is a really great, luxurious grass. It's really colorful in the fall. So I'm looking forward to that one. And it can get about 3 or 4 feet tall, but that's okay. I'm not worried about that, but you can see in contrast to the eyebrow grass behind it, this is super airy and light, and this one's really thick. Let's see, are we ready to scroll through some questions?
Sure. Can you see them okay?
Let's see.
If not, we can read them out for you.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat. Okay. Yeah, so the NC State resources, there's a website called Eco IPM, that's ECOIPM.org, and they have a bunch of really great research, and they're based in NC State.
I just referenced a different one. I thought I linked to NC State page also. So that the one I just posted was about scale.
Okay. Yeah, they have a bunch of articles. They're kind of a powerhouse. They're just like generating a lot of research, and trying to fill this void, this gap in our knowledge of what is going on ecologically in urban areas. We'll probably cut the irrigation. It's kind of linked up to the rest of the park. So we might have to do something fancy if we wanted to cut irrigation to this. But probably in a year or two, we probably won't even need it. And yeah, I was talking about sheet mulching, and that's just a technique to add another layer underneath your like chipped mulch layer to prevent weeds from coming through. Landscape fabric tries to accomplish this, but it actually can cause problems because it doesn't let as much water or gas exchange from the soil to the atmosphere. So the newspaper just kind of breaks down and doesn't cause the same problems. And the question of how many of these type gardens will it take in our downtown area to get enough beneficial insects to be effective, that is the $1 million question. That is what we really want to answer. And so this is just the beginning of something that I hope changes the way that the city of Chattanooga manages lands, and looking at long-term broad strategies for getting diversity and ecosystem services to do some of our work for us. But yeah, that's what we need to do a lot of research on, and UTC will help us with that. And I'm typing that website in. And we have so we published a plant list I sent to the Jefferson Heights community because we have a newer garden over there. But yeah, certainly we could publish this. Our PR representative for Public Works has access to this information. We share a lot of documents with him. And so he could make that into the tweet tomorrow if I ask, probably. But if everyone on here is interested in that plant list, I can definitely send that out. I'm not sure what the Twitter handle is. I think it's City of Chattanooga or Public Works. I'm not sure. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Anna.
And that's really the key question, is what's the effect going to be? There is not much research on this specific kind of work out there, and hopefully we can create some with UTC's help. It's possible we could write a paper based on this in a year or two. It's not like there aren't native plantings in other places, but there isn't much research on how the interaction of biocontrol, urban forestry, and native plantings.
Yeah. And a lot of the research in IPM methods is like agriculture or like insect infestations in public housing, taking care of cockroaches and stuff. So a lot of this kind of urban ecological interface research is very new.
A couple people are asking for the plant list, and
Okay.
we can totally post that on the Wild Ones website. So yeah, we can look forward to getting that out to you folks. Would you like me to look back through some more questions?
Sure.
Okie doke. So we covered the sheet mulching is just a little different from lasagna gardening. Really just a weed barrier kind of right off the bat. Someone was asking just a little bit more information about the beneficial insects that that we're supporting with the garden. So habitat for who, to do what exactly?
Yeah, so the gardens are habitat for the parasitoid wasps that then parasitize, lay eggs inside the scale insect that are sucking the juices on the oak trees. So this is a kind of, it seems like a roundabout way to benefit trees by planting flowers, but this is actually more like a foundation. You know, it's like you don't think about or look at the foundation of your house on a regular basis. You know, you're busy in the kitchen and doing all the important things, but this is what everything is based on in nature. So we're just kind of adding more diversity to a system that lacks a lot of the potential work of an environment. So when you have an urban environment, you lack the diversity to get things like parasites and diverse plant and animal life. And trees actually need that. You know, trees can grow alone, okay, but they grow much, much better when they have a diverse foundation of understory plants and insects to come and pick the nasty critters off of them.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that clarification, bringing the whole picture together.
Yeah.
We've got one question, which is probably kind of just like a general maintenance question for the future of these gardens. How do you keep weeds down and keep the reseeding plants from taking over?
Well, we would like some to reseed, and that's something that a gardener would be worried about if it was very formal and they wanted to keep the same ratio of plants the whole time. With these understory gardens, we're willing to accept a certain amount of flexibility. We actually encourage flexibility because some plants aren't going to like it here. We're going to lose a few. We can always get replacements, but we also want to encourage this to be a self-sustaining system. And so it could be that we come through, and if say the Orangium starts taking over, we can cut the seed heads off of that before they make seeds. There are a lot of cultural practices you can do to reduce your future cover, if you will. So like if the grasses get too big, it's like we can space those out, we can dig them up, we can put them somewhere else, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I would just add, we do have another great resource partnering with parks, is that we're counting on their staff to keep an eye on it, and they are pulling crabgrass as it pops up. So that's really great that we can lean on them for a little bit of weed control. Another question was, is this the only garden like this so far? And you mentioned Jefferson Heights.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've just got the 2 sites at this time because this is a pilot project. I think that's all the questions. If there's anybody else monitoring the questions. And Bill adds that it'll take a while for those plants to fill in, which is true.
Yeah.
And a lot of just positive commentary saying this is great and thanks for pushing for pest management. Yeah, absolutely. We're thrilled about this project. Are these plants suited to dry conditions? Is a question.
I would think yes. I would say they're all at least on some level of dry tolerant, especially the grasses. They have a different kind of photosynthesis that allows them to delay respirating and losing all of their water until nighttime when humidity is higher anyways. So that's a fascinating character of grasses. I love grasses. Yeah, rattlesnake master, Bill, you're right, can take it very, very dry. I saw it at the Chickamauga battlefield on that hike with Zach, and it was in a very dry forest. Very interesting to see it growing out there. There was a lot of it.
Yeah, and I would just add that Jefferson Heights is not irrigated. That's being hand watered, and we'll have a little bit more control over how much water that site gets. So it'll be fun to kind of compare those. This is also question time for Pete. So if I missed any from Pete's presentation, please repost because the chat box is getting really long, which is great. I'm glad.
Let me respond to one I got privately, was just about the species diversity of downtown. And yeah, the rule of thumb I proposed was no species more than 10%. The rule itself is kind of arbitrary, and it completely depends where you draw the boundary. But still, yeah, a quarter of downtown trees being one species is probably too much, and that is definitely contributing to pest problems. So that's something definitely looking at for the future, is diversifying the downtown species palette.
That's great. I had a question. I was so intrigued by your slide where you said that a lot of those trees were not planted. You had the hackberry as the most common species, and then dogwood and cherry. I just thought that was really interesting. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that more, that, hackberries just plant themselves a lot, and they are now in the right way, just being managed. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, and a huge part of the work we do is not in tree pits or planted verges. It is just wooded right away. The outer 2/3 of the city, where it's just naturally regenerated trees, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. Fallen trees, low hanging limbs. That's the majority of the urban forest, and that's where we do the majority of our work. But yeah, as far as I know, hackberry has not been planted anywhere intentionally. A lot of people think of it as a nuisance tree because it often has poor form, and it leaves a lot of honeydew from woolly aphids on cars. But it's got a lot of good qualities, and I'd like to plant. Like I said, there are improved versions of hackberry. I'd like to plant hackberry experimentally. I don't know about black cherry, and dogwood is great, but it is not known to survive in. Street trees have to be really, really hardy to chemicals, salt, heat, poor soil, and dogwood's not known, to my knowledge at least, to do well as a street tree. I wish it did.
We've got a question from Bill Mull. Do you coordinate tree management with EPB?
Not really. I mean, we work with them on storm damage stuff, but not in any comprehensive way.
Okay, and I think I missed a question. I think they were asking this in the middle of your discussion a moment ago. Would it lead to tree removal and replacement? So I'm sorry, that's out of context now.
Yeah, I get it, and the answer is no, but maybe for calorie pears. There's a lot of them left. Bradford pears, calorie pears. There's a lot of them left in Fort Wood and in MLK neighborhood, and I'm interested in someday, when there's more money in the budget, having I think have we done this before, a tree bounty for Bradford pears in private property. I think that's been done here. If we had the funding, it might take a grant. I'd like to remove and replace those, but I don't think we're going to remove and replace willow oaks. We just need to supplement them with different species.
Excellent. I feel like we've pretty much covered everything. Oh, do you work with Eastridge and Red Bank?
Me personally, not yet, but I would like to make those connections.
Right. Those are not city limits, but just coordination efforts would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we get the urban tree grant?
Yeah, we got it. We got the
You
money.
want to tell them what that is?
Yeah, it will be. It's from the state, and this was with a lot of help from water quality and parks again, and green spaces helped. The green spaces actually wrote the grant, but this is going to be reforestation planting in 2 sites in East Brainerd, funded by the state. $20,000 of state money, matching $20,000 of water quality money. Mostly, it'll be 2 sites. One of them is Heritage Park. One of them is along Goodwin Road in the tornado zone. That'll be happening sometime in the winter. The planting will.
Yeah. Well, people are celebrating in the chat box. Yeah, this is really, really exciting. I'm so glad to hear we got that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to, one of those sites was a water quality site. So we're really looking forward to that, especially getting our bioretention back up and running. We got a question, clarification. So yes, Pete Stewart is our City of Chattanooga city forester. So he manages lands that are city lands within city limits. So East Ridge and Red Bank are not city limits. Right. Bill's straightening that out too.
We don't go to Ridgeside either.
Yeah, we never set foot in Ridgeside. How were those trees selected? I'm guessing the trees in the grant.
The streets. We're talking about.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yes, you can read too. How were those streets selected? Excuse me.
Part of the grant criteria were public property and or publicly accessible land. So that ruled out. Obviously, there's worse hit areas in East Brainerd in some of the subdivisions, but those were the affected areas that met the criteria of the grant.
We have a request for you and Lucy's probably contact information. So we can post that in the chat box or on the website.
Either or. Email's good.
Okay. Are you P. Stewart at Chattanooga?
Yeah.
And let's see. So that's Pete, right?
Yep.
Okay. And typing out Lucy here, L.J. Ellis, correct? Oh, you already got it. Great. And you can find out a little more information about the Urban Forestry Division and the Water Quality Division and the Parks Division on the city website. That's always a good place to find just some kind of background information. Great. Well, I feel like we're it's 7:10 and we're kind of petering out on questions. Sally, how are you feeling? Co-host.
I'm fine. I'm good with anything.
Okay. Okay, great. Well,
I know that my there have been some comments about how my audio is garbled. I apologize. But since I recorded this program tonight, my goal is to clean it up a little bit and then post it on our YouTube channel. It's not going to be, you know, like a master class, but it's for some people who have already told me that they'd love to have heard this, but they couldn't make the meeting. So we will do our best to make it available.
Fantastic. That's great. So yeah, any of this information that we promised you, like the species list, we'll get that on the website, and then this presentation will be accessible. So that's great news. I guess unless there are any last lingering questions, we can hang around, I guess, but I just wanted to make sure before anybody drops off to thank you guys. Thank you so much, Pete, Stuart, and Lucy Ellis, for your work for the city and for encouraging the use of native plants and just greater biodiversity for creative new solutions. Thanks so much, y'all. I'm really glad we could share this tonight. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Thanks for inviting us to speak. I'm really glad to share our projects with everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a great opportunity.